So you want more pro sounding chord progressions in your productions. I got you. No, wait, no, this is not a MIDI pack video. But seriously, in this video, I'm going to be showing you the #1 chord technique that if you take and you use it right now, it is going to take your chord progressions from sounding pretty amateur to making them sound way more professional, I guarantee you. And I do want to say this technique is a little bit challenging to wrap your brain around if it's new to you. If you've never heard about this before, if you've never done this or never practiced this before, I want you just to realize that this is going to take some time for you to really internalize and actually really hash out and figure out. But I promise you, if you put in the time, the work, the effort, and the practice to actually use it, it is going to make a very big difference in your productions. So with that, let's jump in. Okay, so we are in Logic. I'm going to go ahead and show you using the keyboard on screen. I'll be playing it right here. You'll be able to see everything. And then I'm also going to be showing you examples using piano roll for those of you guys that don't play piano, but it is definitely really easy to visualize this on the piano, especially if you play the keys. So what we're going to do is take a very simple chord progression. We're just going to take C, A minor, F, G, C. Now, the typical way that people are going to do this, especially people who are beginners and don't really understand this technique, is they're going to play it something like this. Okay, that's because what they're going to do is they're going to take the chords and be like, well, C major has the C, E, and G, then A, C, E, and then F, A, C, and G, B, D for those chords. So we're just going to use those notes and just going to do everything in those voicings. And that's that, right? But the problem is that right there kind of sounds cheesy, if I'm completely honest, and you're going to see what I mean once I actually explain this. So this technique is called voice leading. So what voice leading means is essentially how can we move from one chord to the next chord in a way that is most musically satisfying, essentially. Now, there are more than one way of doing this. There are multiple ways of doing this, but what I'm going to show you is the most simple way of doing it, and it's the way that I actually use on a regular basis as not just a producer, but also as a pianist when I'm actually playing. What I'm going to do is teach you how I can take this to this, or this, or this. Now all of a sudden those chords actually sound interesting, but what's crazy is that I just played the exact same chord progression. The only difference is how I voiced those chords. So what chord voicings means is that I can change the overall way that I play the chords by simply reordering the notes. So if we look at a C major chord, C, E, and G. Now we have all of these different octaves that we can use on the piano, and just in general, you'll see it here on piano roll in a second. So I could go all the way up. And all those notes are just spanned across different octaves. And so what we can do is simply rearrange the order that these notes actually come. So for example, if I have C, E, G, this is a root position chord. But if I take this C here and move it to the top, that is a first inversion chord. And I can take that E and move the E to the top, like that. That is a second inversion chord. And then if we go again, take that G, put on top, all of a sudden we're back to a root position just an octave higher than where we began. We can go the opposite way too. We could take the G, the top note, and move it to the bottom, right here. And all of a sudden, you can just keep going. So what does this have to do with voice leading? This actually has everything to do with voice leading, because the idea of good voice leading is the ability to look at a chord right here that we had before, and if we're going to take an A minor chord, for example, which we said was down here, I'm going to just play the root in the left hand just for, you know, that extra oomph. So if we're going to go from the C major chord to the A minor chord, a better way of actually voicing this is by asking the question, what notes do the two chords have in common, if any? Not every chord is going to share notes, but most chords do. If we take a C major chord, C, E, G, and an A minor chord, A, C, E, notice that they both actually share two notes, the C and the E. C and E are both in A minor and C major. So that leaves the G in that C major chord that's different. So what we want to do is move the note that does not exist in the next chord to the closest note that is in the next chord. I hope that makes sense. So basically, since G is not a part of the A minor chord, it's part of the A minor 7, but not A minor, I want to take that G and I want to move it to the closest note to get into that next chord, which is A. And all I have to do is move that note up one note, and all of a sudden, we have an A minor chord, but the voicing is different. This is now actually a first inversion A minor chord. Now we can do the same thing after this once we go to that F major chord, and we have to ask ourselves again, what notes does A minor and F major have in common? So if we look, we've got A, C, and E, and an F major chord has F, A, and C. So again, they share that A and the C, those two notes right there. So that means that when we're in this chord right here, we have the C, the E, and the A. So what's the note that does not exist in that F major chord? It's that E. So basically what we need to do is we need to take this E and move it to whatever note is closest in proximity to get into the F major chord, which is that F right there. So notice that we can go, we've only changed one note, and all of a sudden we are back on that F major chord. Now, from the F chord to the G chord, let's do the same thing. Ask the question, what notes do these two chords have in common? You have got F, A, and C for an F major chord. You've got G, B, and D for a G major chord. So these chords don't have any notes in common, which means we're gonna have to move all of our notes. But the question becomes, how can we move it with the least amount of movement possible? So we've got this C, F, and G. So we're gonna move everything down. So we're gonna move that C down to B. We're gonna move the F down to D, and then this A down to G. So like this. And so now we're using a G first inversion chord. And then we can go back to the C. Okay, so I went really fast. The reason I'm doing an entire video on this is because I wanted to give you the concept first, and then I'm gonna show you some more examples. That way you can really internalize this, because this is a tricky concept if it's the first time you're listening to it or learning it. Now I'm gonna show you in piano roll, because piano roll is gonna be visually easier to see. Okay, so we've got the exact same chords laid out in piano roll here, how I originally played them without the good voice leading. So listen to this. Okay, straight and simple. So now notice what I'm talking about when I say what notes do they have in common, because from this C major chord here, C, E, G, you can see visually, hey look, those two notes are actually in common, but this note down here is not. See that? Because we've got this note up here and this note down here. So the cool thing is in piano roll, this becomes a little bit easier, because all you need to do is actually bump this note up an octave, just like that, and all of a sudden, it becomes a little bit nicer. Haha! So let's go ahead and bump that note back down, just so we can visualize this again, okay? We can see these two chords share these notes, but notice that when I put that note up there, we've got a pretty big jump down. So listen to what this would sound like. That doesn't really sound very good. Let's kind of emphasize that top note so we can really hear it. That doesn't sound very good. So what we want to do is make sure that whatever notes we have in common, which is this note, we want to bump that up an octave too. And you can see, huzzah, it's actually the same note. But this note here, let's bump that up an octave so you can see it. It's different, but we want to bump that up an octave so that there's as little movement as possible. So this note stays the same, this note stays the same, and this note is different. Let's listen to this now. And then the same thing, you can kind of tell this is really jumpy at the end. So let's just move these notes up an octave, and you can see none of these notes are in common. See, you can see there's no notes in common there. So we can go like this. Okay, that's one way of doing it, but actually what I would probably do, revoice this to bring that one down an octave. So that way it goes down, and then you can see here, we share those notes in common, and those are the only notes, because you can see here, these are not in common. So again, the way you know if something is in common is if they're the same. So you can see all these notes are the same, and they're not gonna move. This note's the same, it's not gonna move, not gonna move. So notice how much static movement there is. But we're gonna notice now, if we turn up the volume of these top notes, we're gonna notice how much better this sounds. Huzzah! And real quick, if you have not checked out my production course, Producer Accelerator, and you're wanting to really level up your own productions, you need to check it out. I have a link down below, and I actually have a free workshop. It's a little under an hour long, covering the 7 keys to pro home studio productions. I highly recommend you check that out. Back to it. And that right there is good voice leading. You can do this in literally every single chord progression. I can just show you a ton of different examples. So we just did the... I'll do that same progression a few different ways. Do it up here. And each one has its own kind of different flavor, its own different kind of flair depending on where you start. So where you start will change where you go. Okay, let's try a different chord progression. So all of those different examples sound way more interesting, and it has everything to do with voice leading. How are you moving from one note to the next? If you're ever working on your chords and you're thinking, man, this sounds like I'm jumping all over the place, it's typically a voice leading problem. So I know this topic is very difficult for people who are just getting started, but I can tell you, if you just practice, do some of the things that I've done here, whether it be on the piano or in piano roll, if you actually spend time practicing, you need to really try to internalize this in your brain. A really good thing you can do is go actually just online and look for chords. Just find the notes that exist in chords. You can very, very easily find all the chords possible. So just use something like ultimateguitar.com. You can actually get chord progressions for popular songs. Use those to practice this stuff with. And if you don't know what notes exist within the chord, literally just go onto Google and look up what those notes are and then practice this technique. I guarantee you it is going to take your chords from sounding very basic to sounding way more professional. I hope this helps. We'll see you in the next one.